We have one last part of the program. It's an important one. We have a distinguished panel. And Alan, you're going to, okay. We have a distinguished journalist to be the moderator of the panel. Alan Berger. He's currently the president of the Press Club. He certainly knows he knows agriculture quite well, growing up on a farm in northern Minnesota. And he covers agriculture for Bloomberg. And he's had lots of different other jobs through the years, and he's had lots of awards. So he is a distinguished journalist and focuses on agriculture, and we're just pleased as can be to have him as our moderator. And you want to bring up your panel?
All right.
Thanks, Alan.
And thank you, Bill. Could we give
No.
a round of applause here? No. Hey, we're the few, we're the proud, we're the last session of the day. Does everyone have the proper amount of blood sugar right now? Does anybody need a quick brownie to keep them going through this last hour? It's important topics, but it is a long day, and I understand that everyone has a lot to do. So we're just going to have a fun final presentation here, and to bring up our podium. Actually, just one quick moment for a quick personal plug. I'd also like to note that along with being president of the National Press Club, I'm also this year the vice president of the North American Agricultural Journalists. Our president, Urban Lehner from DTN, is here. And just to make a little bit of a plug, on April 26th, Monday night, NAAJ is having its big annual party. Starting, I think the dinner starts about at 7 p.m. And it is right here in this ballroom, except we're working on getting Colin Peterson's band. And no offense, Bill, but there's a little more volume on it. We've done it before and it's been successful, but that's the annual NAAJ thing, and it really draws a who's who of everybody across the whole broad range of agriculture. So if you're around DC or something, that might be something to look at as well. Do you have any other notes, Urban?
Cocktails at 6.
Cocktails at 6.
And the speaker will be the executive editor of the Washington Post, Marcus Broadwood. So that might be interesting.
Yeah. So while we've got this captive audience, might as well do a little bit of marketing to you, right? The panel that we have here on our topic for closing the gaps, benefits, and alternative future, we have Charlotte Hedebrand, the chief executive of the International Food and Agricultural Trade Policy Council, with whom I had a wonderful conversation on a flight back from Des Moines last fall after World Food Prize. She's been the chief executive since February of 2006. She came to the IPC from the European Commission's Washington delegation, where she served as a senior advisor. Special advisor on international development, trade, agriculture, and food safety issues. Prior to her time with the EC, she worked at the Brookings Institution's Foreign Policy Division. She has a BA from Georgetown University and an MA in International Relations and Economics from Johns Hopkins University's SAIS. Julie Howard. Julie's in the house. Executive Director from the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa. We're just trying to get the energy level up here, folks. Julie Howard has served as the executive director of the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa, an independent nonprofit coalition. Since 2003, the partnership focuses on strengthening agriculture and economic development in the rural areas where 3/4 of Africans live and work. She's the co-author of several books and was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic, has written on agricultural technology development and transfer in Zambia, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and Somali. She also serves as an adjunct assistant professor of development at Michigan State and holds a PhD in agricultural economics from Michigan State, an MS in international agricultural development from the University of California, Davis, and a BA in International Affairs from George Washington University. I assume you are not 90 years old, however, because these degrees take time. So clearly we have an overachiever in our midst. Katrine, is it pronounced Katrine? Katrin Kuhlman of the Transfarm Africa Corridor Network. She's president of the Trade Aid and Security Coalition, a project of the Global Works Foundation, and a resident fellow at the German Marshall Fund. She also serves as an adjunct professor at the Georgetown University School of Law. Prior to her current position, she was the senior vice president for global trade at the Women's Edge Coalition, where she developed and led the organization's trade policy program. She also previously served as the director for Eastern Europe and Eurasia in the USTR, where she was responsible for developing and coordinating U.S. trade policy with Russia, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. She also holds a JD from Harvard Law School and a BA in Economics and German Studies from Creighton University. And finally, Glenn Prickett, with a man with a clearly colorful background. He's the Chief External Affairs Officer at the Nature Conservancy. You'll know what I'm talking about soon. The leading organization working around the world to protect lands and waters for people and nature. He has spent 13 years previously at Conservation International. He founded and led CEI's Center for Environmental Leadership in Business, a division created to engage the private sector in developing solutions in environmental challenges. He also led the organization's policy and climate change teams. He graduated from Yale University in 1988 with a BA in economics and political science, but he currently performs with the Oxymorons, who you can find at www.oxymorons.com, a blues, rock, and funk band in Washington, D.C. So please welcome our panel. So we're going to be starting with Charlotte, who will be delivering some brief remarks, and then we're going to go to Julie and Glenn and Katrin, because that's what I've been told to do on this sheet of paper. So Charlotte, you go first.
Want me up here?
Yes.
Thank you, Alan. Well, if anybody's blood sugar was low, I think that introduction helped. This policy panel was entitled Policy, so I feel like I can really talk about whatever I want. But no, what I'll try to do is, in fact, I'm not going to really talk much of my prepared remarks. I think I'll try to summarize a little bit of what I've heard throughout the day. I think we've heard from a lot of very brilliant speakers, so it's up to somebody less brilliant to try to put it into something a little more manageable. And I'll try to do that. I want to congratulate the Global Harvest Initiative. I think the focus on increasing productivity while keeping in mind the tremendous resource constraints we face is really important, and certainly that point has been driven home, I think, very well today. And in addition to that, I think the policies have come up again and again. So I think it's good to think about increasing productivity, but we can't really do it without thinking about the right policy framework. So I think we've had a good mix of both a focus on productivity and policies. What I want to do a little bit is talk about trade and market structure policies in particular. And maybe there we've heard a little bit less, and maybe that's because trade really isn't such a big component of food. I think Jason Clay was a little low on the number. It is, in fact, 10% of food production is traded across international borders. And I would add that is actually expected to increase significantly in the context of climate change. If you look at some of the projections of the IPCC in particular, and I think this is important to note, that the imports required in developing countries in the future are going to increase. So something to keep in mind. I don't want to only talk about trade, though. I think it's important to talk about trade and markets, in particular because trade across international border is only a part of this. I think we need to think about markets, regardless of whether they end up bringing product across borders or simply to the next local town or to within the region. So I think let's keep those things together, trade and markets. And I find that often when we think about food security or we read articles, often that's a little bit of a last addendum that people put on. Oh yeah, and open trade is very important because, you know, we need it to get food from place A to place B. And the really brave people will even refer to a 4-letter word in trade that starts with D. But you don't hear that very often. People get nervous about that word lately, it seems to me. So let me just take a few minutes to, again, repeat, I think, what I've heard today. Why is it that trade and markets matter? I think the most obvious reason is that trade and markets help people get access to food. I think equally important, though, is trade and markets help actually, they can play a role in increasing productivity. I mean, we all know, of course, about economies of scale. Markets help the sort of the price signal will convey that there's increased demand, which then allows that to be met by supply. And the last function, I think, here of markets and trade is also a very important one, and it's the income growth. And I think we always have to bear in mind that in some places in the world, in Africa in particular, some 70% of the population is engaged in agriculture. So for them to turn increased productivity into increased incomes requires markets, and that is really a way to lead to income and poverty alleviation. Let me just talk a little bit about what I think I heard today about what we can do to strengthen markets and trade. I think on the market side, in particular in developing countries, there are tremendous supply side constraints that have to be tackled. And I'm pleased that the U.S. government, and I would argue that the international community, is really thinking about how we can work in concert to do this. And supply side constraints, I think, can be divided between hard and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure, of course, are things like roads, electricity, and I think I just want to drive home the importance of infrastructure. Our previous speaker spoke about the importance of roads. I heard somebody say the other day, the road to development is a road. I think we cannot overemphasize the importance of this. If you look at Africa, less than 50% of the population is within proximity of an all-season road. That simply has got to improve. In India, we're talking about, simply because of infrastructure, post-harvest losses of 40%. So I really just want to drive down, and I know the speakers after me will also focus on the importance of infrastructure. Soft infrastructure are some of the policy, how do we create a policy framework that induces the private sector to be active? Also very, very important in addressing supply constraints. Let me talk very briefly about the role of the various players in strengthening markets and promoting trade. Clearly, I think developing countries themselves have to be in the driver's seat, and I think this is recognized now more and more, both by developing countries but also by donor countries. Very happy to see that within the CAADP compact, there's a commitment to increase investment to agriculture to 10% of government's budget. Not everybody's obviously meeting that yet, but I think the goal at least is laudable. I think the private sector has to play a crucial role, and I think the role of developed countries is also one that we need to think about here. Obviously, there are tremendous financial needs. I think the FAO has put the total price tag of accomplishing food security by 2050 at $83 billion per year. Now, that includes everybody. That's developing country resources, developed country resources, private sector. I think we have to be very clever. I agree that there's a long-standing problem in donor coordination, but if we don't get better at this, we're going to simply keep pouring money into something and it's not going to have any impact. So we've got to get better about our development assistance. And I think the important point here is also that we need to be in this for the long run, because a lot of these investments are not going to be paying off immediately. So we can't sort of swerve our policy every few years. And then I think the other very important role that developed countries can play is they need to think about their own policies in cohesion. It's not sufficient to only think about development assistance and then sort of think separately about your trade policy or about your agricultural policies at home. We really need to think about how can we create a system where one set of policies is reinforced by another. And I'm always struck by this figure. If you look at the cost of developed countries' agricultural policies to developing countries, it's about $17 billion per year. And that is actually equal to 5 times as much of the overseas development assistance going to the ag sector. So I just make that point that while we're focusing on ag development, we also need to be thinking about what kind of production incentives are we setting with our own agricultural policies. So with that, I'd like to end. Thanks very much.